The sound that started everything was metal on metal. A key turning too smoothly and my apartment door upstairs. I was in the shop below, half hidden behind the workbench, filing the teeth of an antique cabinet key for a priest who never paid on time. The shutters were down. The clock above the receipts said 9:15. Outside, Palermo sounded like scooters, dishes, laughter from the trattoria on the corner. Inside, Bellini keys. I knew every sound. The front shutter settling, the old fridge buzzing, the ceiling pipe knocking once when the upstairs sink ran. The turn of that deadbolt was wrong. My grandfather had installed it himself, 3 years earlier. Overset latch, stubborn spring, tiny catch on the second turn. Anyone who lived there learned the resistance. Whoever was opening it now did not meet any. My stomach dropped so hard I set the file down on my own thumb and sliced the skin. I stood very still. Then my phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. A picture. My building door at dusk, my floor, my landing, my apartment number. A second message followed. I know where you sleep. Something cold moved under my ribs. I hit call on the only number I had that might matter tonight, though I had never actually expected Luca Moretti's office to answer when a locksmith from Via Calderai panicked after dark. His driver had left a safe lock with me that afternoon. Priority, he'd said, and because everyone in Palermo knew what name not to mishandle, I had nodded and kept my eyes down. Now the line clicked once. A man answered, Moretti. Not an assistant. Him. Words tangled in my throat. Upstairs the door opened. I whispered, Someone is in my apartment. A beat. No disbelief. No questions meant to waste time. Are you inside? No, shop. Stay there. I think. My mouth dried out. I think he copied my key. The front shutter banged once from the outside. My whole body locked. Another knock. Precise. Controlled. Not the frantic banging of a drunk. Not a neighbor. Not a policeman. Above me, a floorboard creaked. I moved backward, reached under the counter, and wrapped my shaking fingers around the old iron hammer my grandfather used for hinge pins. The knock came again. Sophia. His voice, low, clear, unhurried. I let out a breath so hard it hurt and went to the shutter, lifting it just enough for a man's shoulders to appear in the gap. Luca Moretti straightened as the metal rose. He wore charcoal, no tie, a dark coat open at the throat. 2 men stood behind him in the alley light. No one on the street looked directly at them. That told me more than the guns I could not quite see. His gaze landed on my face first, then the blood welling from my thumb. Then the hammer. You're bleeding, he said, not my main concern. Something like approval moved behind his eyes and vanished. I stepped aside. He entered. His men stayed outside, one already moving toward the rear stair that led to my apartment. I heard it then, a muffled thud above us. Someone running. I blurted, He knows where I live. Luca looked up toward the ceiling as if it were only another locked thing in his way. Not after tonight, he won't. He said it quietly. That was the worst part. He crossed the shop in 3 steps, reached for the ring of tagged keys hanging by my bench, then stopped. Which one? I pointed. Brass head, 3rd from the left. When he lifted it, his signet ring scraped against the key with a sharp metallic drag. That sound went through me. He took 2 steps toward the stair, then paused. Anyone else upstairs? Mrs. D'Amico, 3rd floor. Widow, bad knee. Her chain lock is loose on the bottom bracket. He looked back at me. I realized too late what I had done. Not pleaded for myself, not clung to him, catalogued to the vulnerable person nearby like I was reading damage from a lock face. His expression did not change, but something in the room did. He gave one order in Italian to the men outside, fast, exact. One of them peeled away toward the adjoining building entrance. Then Luca went up the stairs. The shop seemed to inhale after he left. I stayed behind the counter with the hammer in both hands and counted breaths I could not feel. Above me, footsteps. A shout. Furniture striking wall. Then silence so sudden it made my ears ring. I should have been afraid of what happened next. I was. I was also listening for the little catch in the deadbolt. The broken rhythm would tell me whether it had been forced or opened clean. 10 seconds later, the door upstairs slammed. 40 seconds after that, Luca came back down. There was blood over his knuckles. Not a splash. A working man's damage. Fresh, bright, already drying in the lines of his hand. My eyes went there before I could stop them. "He's alive," Luca said, "for now." I swallowed. "Did he use your key?" He held it up between us. "No, a copy." My knees weakened with relief and terror all at once. He saw that too. I reached for the clean rag on the counter without thinking, took his hand before my courage failed, and pressed the cloth gently over the split skin of his knuckles. His hand went completely still under mine. I did not know why I did it. Maybe because blood was easier than panic. Maybe because damage had always made more sense to me than comfort. The silence between us changed temperature. "Mrs. D'Amico?" I asked softly. "Already moved next door?" Only then did I breathe. Luca watched my face the way a man watches a door unlock by itself. "Little stray," he said. It was not kind. Not cruel either. An observation with ownership standing behind it. I should have let go of his hand then. I did not. A siren wailed 3 streets over, meaningless, too far. One of his men came in, apartments cleared, copy blank found in the bathroom drain. Someone coached him. Luca's jaw hardened once. His gaze shifted over my shoulder, to the wall of old key drawers. The Bellini name burned above them, my grandfather's handwriting on every brass tab. "This shop closes tonight," he said. I finally released his hand. "What? You don't sleep upstairs again? I can't just leave." "You can." His voice stayed level. "You will. My whole life is here." He looked past me toward the dark stairwell leading to my apartment, then back to the bloody cloth in my hand. "No," he said, "it was." The front shutter rattled back down behind us, and the door upstairs stayed open. I did not pack like women did in films. No dramatic pause over lipstick, no trembling hand on a framed photograph. I grabbed practical things. Jeans, underwear, my grandfather's measuring calipers, the ledger box hidden beneath the false drawer in the bench because I had promised him, right before the stroke took the rest of his speech, that I would never let anyone with soft hands walk away with it. By the time I came back downstairs with my bag, Luca was standing where the light hit the counter edge and left the rest of him in shadow. One of his men had already cleaned the blood from the floor near the stair. Of course he had. Luca's gaze dropped to the box in my hand. "What's that? Records? For what? Keys?" That earned me a longer look. He took my apartment key from his pocket and set it on the counter between us. The scrape of ring on brass sounded again. Show me what was copied. I should not have liked being asked something I was actually good at. But I did. I knelt by the deadbolt plate he had removed from my door and pointed to the tiny silvered line on the inner ward. Whoever cut the copy did it from an impression, not the original. "See this drag?" The blank was too soft. It snagged here first, then shaved itself down. His men leaned in. Luca did not. He watched me instead. "You can tell that from one line?" "Yes." "Could you find the cutter?" "Maybe. If he bought local blanks. Not if someone with money ordered from Catania." The corner of Johnny Ricci's mouth twitched from the doorway. I recognized him from the afternoon delivery. The broad shoulders, expensive sneakers, and expression of a man personally betrayed by bread. "So," he said, terrifying. "Also, for the record, I skipped dinner for this emergency, and if the boss gets us shot before I break my fast, I'll file a complaint." Luca did not turn. "You'll file nothing." Johnny sighed. "This is why morale suffers." I would have laughed if I were not carrying my life in a bag. Maybe because I almost did. Luca's eyes flicked to my mouth and away again. Outside, his car waited at the curb. I locked the shop myself. Ritual mattered. The Bellini sign over the shutter looked smaller than it had an hour ago. The brass around the keyhole was scratched from generations of hands. Mine shook on the final turn. Luca took the key from me before I could pocket it. Hey, you don't keep this tonight. It's my shop. It's an address. That should not have felt different. It did. The Moretti villa sat above Mondello, all pale stone and dark water below, less like a home than a decision rich men made and called architecture. The gates opened before the car stopped. Armed men glanced in, saw Luca, saw me, and looked away fast enough to be respectful and slow enough to be startled. The house inside smelled of lemon oil, old money, and a colder scent I was beginning to associate with hymn night air on wool. A woman in her 60s met us in the entrance hall. Silver hair pinned smooth, black dress immaculate. Teresa, Luca said. Her gaze moved over me, my bag, the box in my arms. So this is the locksmith. This is Sofia Bellini. Do you talk to all women like job descriptions? She asked him. Johnny choked on a laugh behind us. Teresa held out her hand to me. Warm, dry, steady. Come. Before the men start pretending not to stare. My room was on the guest wing, second floor, sea view. I was too frightened to appreciate. Fresh clothes already laid out. Water by the bed. A silver crucifix on the wall and a heavy door with a lock that turned from the inside. And, I noticed after one quiet test, from the outside too. Teresa saw me notice. Only at night, she said. Only if he orders it. I set my bag down slowly. That doesn't help. It wasn't meant to. Then, softer. Neither was it meant to hurt. After a shower hot enough to sting, I followed the smell of coffee downstairs and found Johnny in the kitchen weighing prosciutto on a digital scale with the concentration of a surgeon. A dark-haired woman in navy scrubs stood by the sink stirring tea. Beautiful in a blunt, unimpressed way. This, Johnny announced, is Dr. Nina Ferraro, who heals gunshots but refuses to acknowledge that cured meat is medicine. Nina did not look up. This is Johnny Ricci, who thinks ketosis is a personality. I laughed then. Actually laughed. It came out thin and surprised, but real enough that both of them glanced at me. Johnny put a hand to his chest. Good, the hostage smiles. We're practically a family. I'm not a hostage, I said. Nina finally turned. Then don't let the gates confuse you. Luca entered a moment later and the room altered around him. Not silence, exactly. More like everyone remembered where the walls were. He stood at the end of the table, coat gone, sleeves rolled once. The bandage on his knuckles had been replaced cleanly. I hated that I noticed the neatness of it. Eat, he said. I'm not hungry. You will be in an hour. Eat anyway. I should have refused on principle. Instead, I sat. He gave instructions without raising his voice. You stay on this floor or the south terrace until I say otherwise. Teresa or Nina with you if you leave the wing. No calls from your shop line. Johnny will send a man for the door hardware in the morning. My shop is not evidence to be bagged and tagged. No, he said calmly. It's bait. The word turned the coffee bitter in my mouth. I set the cup down harder than I meant to. And me? His gaze held mine. Not if I can help it. Nina went very still at the stove. Johnny inspected his scale as if it had become spiritually important. I stood because sitting felt too much like agreement. You don't know me. No. Then stop deciding things for me. Something changed in his face. Not anger, worse. Restraint. He crossed the kitchen, stopped just beyond touch, and held out my apartment key on his open palm. For 1 second, I thought he was giving it back. He closed his fingers around it instead. You don't go home without me, he said quietly. And because he said it like fact, not threat, it landed harder. Morning made the villa look less sinister and more expensive, which was somehow worse. I woke before dawn because I was not used to silence that thick. In my apartment above the shop, mornings came with scooters, church bells, and the downstairs shutter complaining. Here there was only sea wind against the glass and the faint, disciplined movement of men changing guard below. I dressed in borrowed linen and took the ledger box to the terrace because if I was going to be trapped, I wanted sun while it happened. The box smelled like old cedar and brass filings. My grandfather had made it with hidden channels the way other men built confessionals. Lift the false panel. Slide the catch. Press the knot in the wood grain that was not a knot at all. Inside were decades of Bellini records. Not customer names exactly. My grandfather had been careful. Codes. Job numbers. Symbols for buildings important enough to be dangerous. Half the entries were ordinary. Mailboxes. Church doors. Apartment buzzers. The other half sat in tighter columns with red pencil marks in the margins. Safe flats. Master blanks. Emergency replacements. I heard Luca before I saw him. Not from footstep volume, but from what happened to the two guards at the terrace door. Their posture sharpened. One moved aside. He came out in dark trousers and a white shirt, open at the throat, carrying coffee he did not offer me because this was not that kind of conversation. "You brought records," he said. "You took me from my shop in the middle of the night. That is not an answer." I looked down at the page in front of me. "No, it isn't." He set his cup on the stone rail. "Try again." So I did, though I was not sure why. My grandfather serviced properties for people who paid extra not to be written down. He wrote them down anyway, just not in ways they could read. Luca came closer. The cold note beneath his cologne reached me first. Outdoor air. Car leather. Morning. Did he service my family? Yes. The silence after that was not empty. It was evaluating. I slid the ledger toward him and pointed to a symbol shaped like a split crown. "These are Moretti-owned buildings. Or were. He didn't always know the current shell companies." His eyes flicked over the page once and sharpened. "This mark, emergency access, means the key was cut twice. One official, one duplicate held off-site. By who? My grandfather. Where? If I knew that, I would have slept less as a child." The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. He did not touch the ledger. Smart. Oils from hands damage old paper. Or maybe he simply understood that reaching for another dead man's secrets too fast was a good way to lose the living woman guarding them. "Why didn't you tell me last night?" he asked. "Because men with power turned information into ownership. Because my grandfather taught me that keys and names change shape in the wrong mouths. Because I did not know yet whether Luca Moretti was a shelter or a better-dressed cage. Instead I said, 'You were busy bleeding.'" His gaze dropped briefly to the bandage on his hand, then back to me. I had the ridiculous urge to apologize and no intention of doing it. Teresa appeared with a tray of breakfast and one warning look at me that somehow included too many things. Eat. Don't trust silence. Don't mistake steadiness for softness. After she left, Luca turned a page carefully by the corner. This code. He tapped a red mark beside a seaside address. "I know this apartment." "You should. It burned 12 years ago." He went very still. I saw it because I was looking at the paper, not him. The shift came through the air instead of his face. "That building belonged to a shell company," he said. "Yes." "It was sold after the fire." "Yes." "You know a great deal for a locksmith." I closed the ledger. Locksmiths know who wants doors open quietly. We just pretend not to. A phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it once. It buzzed again. He looked at the screen, and the temperature around him dropped. "Gianni found your stalker's car," he said. "Abandoned 2 streets from your shop. Alive? For now." I stood too fast, chair legs scraping tile. "I'm coming." "No. You need me to read the copied key marks if he has tools." He should have said no again. He wanted to. I saw it. Instead, after one hard second, he said, "Stay beside me." The basement room under the west wing smelled like damp stone and coffee left too long on a warmer. Emiliano Riva sat zip-tied to a chair under one hanging bulb, lips split, expensive loafers ruined. I recognized him instantly then. Not because I knew him well, but because I had seen him twice outside the shop pretending to check messages. My stomach went sour. Johnny leaned against the wall, eating almonds with tragic discretion. "I'm told these are heart-healthy," he said. "Personally, I think they taste like punishment." Nina was wrapping gauze around one of a guard's forearms nearby. She gave me a quick assessing look and then, quietly, acceptance. Not pity. Better. Emiliano sneered when he saw me. You acted. I did not answer. I looked at his hands instead. Tiny brass stains along the cuticles, filing dust in the knuckle hair, a shallow nick on the side of his thumb where a blank had slipped under pressure. He cut the copy himself, I said. Luca's head turned slightly. You're sure? Yes. Emiliano laughed, nervous now. I bought one key, that's all. One blank. I corrected. Cheap brass, not local. Catania order. The smile left his face. Luca watched me, not him. I suddenly understood what it meant to surprise a dangerous man usefully. It was not safe. One of Luca's captains came in at speed. Boss. Rear gate camera down. South wall trip alarm triggered. Luca's attention shifted, instant and total. Something was moving against us already. Luca. She had been shaking in that shop and still named the widow upstairs before herself. Now she stood under a hanging bulb in his basement, pale and stubborn, weeding brass dust off another man's hands like scripture. Useful should not have felt like this. Dangerous should have felt cleaner. Instead, he looked at her and saw the one thing he had not been able to save when he was 19, a woman trying to build safety with practical hands because no one came in time. He looked back at me once. Upstairs, now, I should have argued. I did not. Because whatever had just stepped onto his property knew enough to strike where the cameras blinked, and I had brought a ledger full of doors. By the time the first shot cracked across the courtyard, I was halfway up the west stair with Nina behind me and Johnny swearing about cardio somewhere below. The villa did not erupt into chaos. That would have been easier to understand. It tightened. Men moved faster, quieter. Doors shut. Teresa pushed me through a side gallery with one hand on my shoulder and a rosary in the other. Somewhere outside, Italian snapped low and sharp through radios. A second shot struck stone. South wall, Nina muttered. Decoy. I did not ask how she knew. I was starting to understand that everyone in Luca's house had learned knowledge the ugly way. Teresa took me into a small chapel off the inner courtyard and locked the carved cedar door. Stay here. No. Her eyes flashed. Wrong answer. I know old locks better than your men do. If someone comes through that door, I'm not praying at it. That earned me the briefest pause. Then she thrust a heavy iron candlestick into my hand. Fine. At least swing properly. The chapel smelled of wax and old limestone. I stood by the door listening to boots run past outside, the candlestick slick in my palm. Nina cracked the shutters with 2 fingers and glanced into the courtyard. 3 at the wall, she whispered. No 2. 1 down. I could not stay still. I looked at the lock instead. 17th century mortise, hand-filed ward, inner catch, worn recently. Someone had serviced it badly. The screw head by the latch sat a fraction too proud, bright at the edge. Fresh. Who repaired this? I asked. Nina looked over. What? This door? Recently. I don't know. My pulse kicked harder. It was opened. Before she could answer, the handle turned. No force. No shoulder hit. A key. I raised the candlestick. The latch lifted and then stopped short. Someone on the other side had the wrong angle. The imperfect copy caught on the inner ward exactly where it should. I yanked the door wide before the man outside could recover and drove the candlestick into his wrist. He screamed. A gun clattered over stone. Nina was on it instantly, kicking it away. I shoved the man backward and saw the key fall from his hand. Rough. Blank. Bellini cut. Badly. The world narrowed to the small, bright line of brass on the floor. Then, Luca appeared from the far side of the courtyard. Blood at his collar. Gun low in one hand, his face calm in the way storms are not. He took in the scene once the fallen man, the dropped copy, me still holding the candlestick hard enough to splinter my palm. His gaze landed on the key. That, he said to the man on the ground, was a mistake. It lasted less than 10 seconds after that. One of Luca's men hauled the intruder upright. Another covered the archway. Luca crossed the courtyard without hurry and took the copy key from the stone. The metallic scrape of his signet ring against the cheap brass sounded ugly, wrong. He looked at me. "Are you hurt? My hand?" He stepped closer. Not too close. Never accidentally too close. When he took the candlestick from me, his fingers brushed my knuckles, and the contact jolted harder than the gunshot had. Nina saw it. Of course she saw it. She looked discreetly at the wounded intruder instead. Johnny limped in through the side arch a second later, winded and furious. "Good news, I'm alive. Bad news, someone made me sprint uphill before lunch. If I collapse, tell my mother I died from tactical overexertion." Nina did not glance at him. "You would have died from pancetta eventually anyway." "I can heal from bullets," Johnny informed me solemnly. "Not from this woman." Despite the blood and the man groaning on the flagstones, I laughed once, startled out of myself. Luca's eyes shifted to my mouth again. It happened too often to be accidental and too briefly to be anything I could use. He turned the copy key in his hand. "This wasn't made from your apartment impression," he said. "No." "How do you know?" "The shoulder length is off. Whoever cut it worked from a Bellini pattern, but not mine." I swallowed. It opened something else in this house. That silence hit everyone. Luca's gaze sharpened with something colder than anger. "Which lock?" I held out my hand. He gave me the key. Our fingers touched again. Deliberate this time, maybe only because neither of us pretended otherwise. I studied the blank under the chapel lamp. Then I saw it. The old 4-gate notch. Pre-war Sicilian copy shape. Rare. Lower archive, I said. Or chapel storage. Older Moretti hardware. Luca went still. His thumb rubbed once over the bandage at his knuckles, then dropped. "No one goes there without me. Someone just tried." He said something in Sicilian over his shoulder. Fast. Final. Men moved instantly. When the courtyard cleared, only Nina remained, binding my scraped palm with far more gentleness than her voice ever suggested. Luca stood under the chapel arch, holding the cheap copied key like it had turned into a name. "What's in the lower archive?" I asked. His eyes came back to mine. "Paper. That is not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." He started to turn away, then stopped. Maybe because my bandage had slipped. Maybe because he saw my throat moving too fast with breaths I would not admit to. He stepped in close enough for me to feel the cool of outside still clinging to his shirt, and used 2 fingers to straighten the collar of my borrowed dress where it had twisted under the chapel cross. Chain. His knuckles brushed the base of my throat. I forgot to breathe. He did too. Only for a second. Maybe less. Then he dropped his hand and looked at Nina, not me. "Stay with her." That night, Johnny reported from the kitchen, between dramatic bites of grilled chicken, that Emiliano Riva had sung quickly, once shown the copy key. He was not obsessed with me. He had been paid to get into Bellini records and test which Moretti locks still matched old Bellini cuts. "By who?" I asked. Luca did not answer immediately. He was standing at the far counter, one hand on the marble, face unreadable. "A man inside my world," he said at last. The first mystery had closed. The deeper one had just opened. The first time Luca took me back to my shop, he brought 6 men and let none of them touch the key drawers until I said so. Bellini keys smelled like oil, filings, paper dust, and the ghost of my grandfather's hand cream lavender, always. Someone had searched it, but not clumsily. Drawers shifted a fraction out of line. Receipt book moved from left of till to right. Rear bench opened and closed with the catch seated wrong. "They knew what they wanted," I said. "Did they get it?" I set the ledger box on the counter and checked the false drawer where my grandfather kept old pattern wafers. Empty. Yes. The word fell heavily. I should have told Luca then about the second hiding place. Instead, shame made me stupid for a minute. "Not everything," I said. His gaze cut to me. "How much didn't they get?" I crouched by the old duplicator machine and unscrewed the brass cap on the stabilizing leg. A rolled strip of onion skin slid into my palm, numbers, symbols, building marks my grandfather only used for emergency access records. Luca's expression changed. Not softer. Respectful, maybe. More dangerous for that. You hid that from me. I didn't know you. And now? I looked at the strip instead of him. Now I know you move faster than panic. The silence after that felt almost like a smile and not at all like safety. We spent the morning sorting damage. I showed his men which drawers had been rifled, which blanks were missing, which old Moretti profiles could still open retired locks if duplicated well enough. Luca stood beside the bench more than once, close enough that our sleeves brushed when I reached for tools. Every time it happened, neither of us acknowledged it. Every time I knew. Almost. Around noon, Johnny arrived with lunch, 2 armed men, and a tragic expression. Nina says if I keep skipping carbohydrates, I'll become a cautionary tale, he informed the room. Then she handed me lentils like an insult. He set the paper parcels on the counter and eyed the duplicate machine. This thing looks like it yearns to remove fingers. It only removes stupid ones, I said. Johnny brightened. Excellent. I'll keep the boss away from it. Luca did not look up from the stripped work orders. Try. Later, when the men were checking the rear alley, I clamped a brass blank into the vise and began filing a new test key for the old archive profile. Luca watched from the doorway with one shoulder against the frame, saying nothing. You're staring, I muttered. And thinking. That sounds worse. A beat. It usually is. The key shone dully under the bench lamp. I cut the first ridge, then the second. The work steadied me. People think the teeth are the important part, I said before I could decide not to. The top gets all the attention. But what matters is the depth in the valleys. Too shallow and it never reaches the pins. Too deep and it snaps. Luca's gaze stayed on my hands. You're talking about keys, he said. Yes. He let the answer stand. So did I. That evening, the world forced open what I had hidden. A patrol car stopped outside the shop just as we were packing up. 2 officers got out. One I knew by sight, Inspector Barty, who treated women reporting harassment like badly behaved weather. The other carried a warrant. Forgery of restricted housing access, Barty said, pleased with himself. Interesting hobby, Sophia. My whole body went cold. Luca stepped forward before I could. You have poor timing. Barty recognized him and recalculated in public. We're here on a legitimate complaint. I stared at the warrant in the officer's hand and felt the floor tilt. My secret, not the ledger. Worse, in a smaller, more personal way. For the last year, after a woman from 3 streets over got sent back to an abusive husband because the shelter door jammed and no one came in time, I had been quietly cutting emergency duplicates for women who needed out fast back doors, storage gates, laundry exits, places landlords refused to fix. Illegal, technically. Necessary, absolutely. The police had no business knowing, unless someone inside the complaints office sold names again. Luca took the warrant, scanned it once, and handed it back untouched. She comes with counsel. She comes now. His eyes lifted. No. The word was soft. Barty made the mistake of taking a half step toward me anyway. Luca did not raise his voice. You don't reach for her in front of me. The alley behind the shop had gone very still. Barty stopped. Sweat showed at his temple. I should have been horrified by how fast power rearranged itself around one man's refusal. I was also relieved enough to feel ashamed after the police left. Promising to return through proper channels that suddenly mattered very much to them, Luca turned to me in the back workroom. Emergency duplicates for battered women. I crossed my arms because it kept them from shaking. You say that like you're disappointed. No. He looked at the stacked blank envelopes on the shelf. I say it like I'm revising. Revising what? His jaw shifted once. You. I should have let that sit. Instead, I made my first real mistake. And what exactly did you think I was? Something closed in his face. Not anger. Distance. A liability, he said. Then he walked out to take a call, leaving me with the cut brass key in my hand and the awful knowledge that being seen clearly by him mattered more than it should have. From the front room, I heard Johnny answer his phone. "Yes, Daughteressa, I ate the lentils," he said mournfully. "No, I did not enjoy the lentils. I'm not a saint." I laughed, then hated myself a little for it. When Luca came back in, his expression was colder. "Ricardo approved the police warrant," he said. Luca's cousin, head of internal security, the man who controlled safe addresses. Betrayal had not been proven, but it had finally put its hand on the lock. Ricardo invited us to the old fish cannery with perfect manners. That was how men like him did things. They sent a location through internal channels, called it a security review, and expected everyone else to arrive already half inside the trap. Luca knew it before we got there. I knew it because he let me come anyway. The cannery sat at the edge of the harbor, all rusted beams and broken windows overlooking black water. Wind pushed salt through the empty loading bays. Somewhere inside, loose sheet metal clicked like teeth. "Stay beside me," Luca said. "I know. No." His gaze cut to mine. "You listen." I looked away first. Not obedience. Self-preservation. Janny muttered into his collar mic. "If I'm murdered on an empty stomach, I'm haunting procurement." Even Luca's mouth almost moved at that. We found the first body in the ice room, one of Ricardo's men, dead too neatly to be warning and too publicly placed to be random. Nina's brother Paolo, who ran medical supply deliveries for the villa, lay handcuffed near the drain, pulse weak, throat bruised. Johnny swore and dropped beside him. Alive, barely. The radio on the wall crackled. Ricardo's voice came through smooth as polished stone. "Luca, if you brought Bellini, you brought the ledger strip. Send her to the roof. Alone, or Paolo bleeds where he lies." Luca did not answer right away. I understood then, with awful clarity, that Ricardo knew exactly how Luca measured cost. Paolo groaned once. Janny pressed harder on the wound in his side and barked for a medic team. "I can go," I said. "No. Luca, no." It came out quiet and absolute. Another voice on the radio. "Ricardo again. You always were sentimental where you should have been strategic." That landed. I saw it. Luca reached past me, shut off the radio, then looked at the ladder bolted to the far wall leading up to the roof hatch. His face had gone so still it frightened me more than shouting would have. "Give me the strip," he said. I did. He tucked it inside his jacket. "You stay here with Johnny." I grabbed his sleeve before I could stop myself. Almost. He looked down at my hand there, at my fingers on his coat, then slowly back at my face. "If he shoots you." "He won't," Luca said. "You don't know that." His expression changed by one fraction. "Yes, I do. Because Ricardo wanted something slower. Because men who confuse protection with ownership always did." He lifted my hand from his sleeve and held it 1 second too long before letting go. Then he went up the ladder. The gunfire started 30 seconds later. Short, brutal, close. I stopped hearing the harbor. Stopped hearing Johnny yelling for the medics. Everything in me narrowed to the iron hatch above. When the first body crashed down the ladder shaft, I barely flinched. When the second man shouted from the roof edge that Bellini had to come now, I picked up his dropped pistol. Johnny looked at me from the floor. One bloodied hand still on Paolo's bandage. "Boss told you to stay. And you told Nina you liked lentils. We all lie under stress." I went up. The roof wind hit hard and cold. Luca stood near the parapet with blood running from a cut at his temple and murder in his posture. Ricardo's remaining men were down. Ricardo himself had vanished across the adjoining roofline, leaving only the ledger strip burning in a metal pan. "Luca." He turned at the sound of my voice just as a hidden shooter rose from behind the vent stack. I saw the barrel first. Luca moved faster than fear. He crossed the space, hit me hard enough to knock the pistol from my hand, and took the bullet grazing his side instead of my chest. The sound that came out of me did not feel human. Then he was on the shooter. No speech, no threat, no wasted motion, only that terrible Moretti efficiency. It ended before I could make myself breathe again. When it was over, The wind smelled like salt and cordite and blood. Luca was bleeding through his shirt. I dragged him toward the hatch enclosure and pressed both hands to his side. Sit. He obeyed, which frightened me more than if he had not. I tore fabric, found the wound, wrapped, held. His hand closed over my wrist, not to stop me. To ground, maybe. To make sure I was still there. My eyes burned. I'm not afraid of you, I whispered. I'm afraid of what happens to me when you do that. The truth cost. Luca. She had been shaking in that shop, hornered and white with fear, and still the first thing out of her mouth after he came through the door had been for the widow upstairs. Then she read the lock damage cleanly and pressed cloth to his bleeding hand as though he were a wound instead of a weapon. He had wanted her from that moment in the only ways he trusted least, and he had stopped himself 3 separate times because she mattered more than wanting. He touched my face with blood-streaked fingers, careful despite everything. Little stray, he said. Warmer now. Worse for that. Look at me. I did. The kiss was inevitable only in hindsight. In the moment, it felt impossible right up until it happened. Slow, questioning, his restraint still inside it even as his mouth met mine. No hunger without permission, no taking. Just the unbearable tenderness of a man who could ruin rooms choosing not to ruin me. Then he stopped, forehead against mine, breathing hard. Another radio burst crackled from below. Johnny shouting, men arriving. Luca drew back first. He always did. He looked toward the dark line of the harbor, where Ricardo had vanished, and something in his face told me this had gone beyond stalking. Beyond the ledger. Beyond me. War had arrived. War turned the villa into a machine. Cars came and went at all hours. Phones vibrated in men's hands and made them pale. Teresa moved through the kitchen, praying under her breath, while Nina stitched wounds in the downstairs study because the clinic was no longer safe enough. Luca slept less than anyone and looked exactly as if he had expected this his whole life. For 3 days, I saw him mostly in doorways. A question. Have you eaten? A command. Stay inside after dark. A glance that lasted too long and ended first from his side, not mine. Almost. Johnny appeared wherever dread grew too thick, once in the armory, pressing a protein yogurt into Nina's hand like a peace offering. For your blood sugar, he said. For your delusion, she replied, but she took it. Another time he came into the study where I was checking old Bellini profiles against property maps and said, in a tone of fresh injury, did you know stress water retention is real? Criminal enterprises are terrible for the waistline. I laughed. Nina did too, without meaning to. Johnny stared at her like a man witnessing divine approval. Then Renato Serra died on the North Road. He had been my driver twice, quiet and patient. The sort of man who remembered I hated blind turns and always slowed before them. He brought me coffee in paper cups without asking how I took it. He showed me, one dawn on the terrace, how Palermo looked safest from far away and most dangerous up close. Ricardo's men rammed his car into the barrier while escorting Teresa back from church. Teresa survived with 2 cracked ribs and fury enough to resurrect saints. Renato did not. Luca told me in the chapel because he knew the stone would keep my reaction smaller. He stood 2 feet away with his hands in his pockets, as if containing them mattered. Teresa said he pushed her down before impact, he said. He knew. I sat on the front pew because my knees refused anything nobler. He was kind to me. I know. That was all. No speeches, no comfort. Too clean to survive the room. I cried then, not prettily, not like heroines. Quiet, angry tears that made me hate my own helplessness. Luca did not touch me. I think that mercy mattered as much as any touch would have. By evening, he had arranged my exit. Passport, cash, new phone, a train ticket south to a convent safe house outside Ragusa under an alias that sounded like a woman who ironed her life flat. He set them on the desk in my room and looked at the sea instead of me. You leave at dawn. I stared at the ticket. You decided. Yes, because Renato died. Yes, the truth of it hit harder than consolation would have. He turned then, and I saw what the decision was costing him, not in his voice, in the fact that he had already done it. "If you stay," he said, "Ricardo keeps using your address, your face, your history. He'll burn every place you ever stood in until I hand you over or he's dead. And if I go, you live." It should have been enough. Maybe for a wiser woman. I picked up the passport, then set it down again. "Do you want me gone because it's safer?" I asked. "Or because you stop thinking clearly when I'm in the room?" Silence. I had asked the wrong thing and also the truest. Finally, he said, "Both." That should have made leaving easier. Instead, it made my chest ache in a way I did not want to examine too closely. At dawn, Johnny drove me to the station with 2 escorts and a bag of compliance snacks Nina had forced on him, and he had theatrically redistributed. The road out of Palermo smelled like diesel and sea salt. Every passing scooter looked like memory. Johnny kept one hand on the wheel and sighed heavily. For the record, I dislike emotional transport assignments. Bad for digestion. You can still turn around. "I can," he agreed. "And the boss can have me flayed. Also bad for digestion." At the station, the platform was all pigeons and weak coffee and people pretending not to study the armed men around me. My train waited under dirty glass. Ragusa existed. The convent existed. A quieter future existed. Not the one I had planned, but something survivable. This was the real exit. No one forced me onto the train. No one lied. I could take my bag, take the alias, take the chance to become smaller and safer and less visible to the kind of men who carried addresses like knives. The conductor blew the whistle. My phone vibrated. Not Luca. Teresa. He buried Renato before sunrise because he didn't want you seeing the dirt hit. The words blurred. I looked at the train door, at my reflection in the smeared glass, at the woman holding a ticket she had not chosen but could still use. Then at Johnny. "Turn the car around," I said. His eyebrows climbed. "I'm sorry. Ricardo doesn't want me because of me. He wants what my grandfather hid behind Bellini emergency profiles. There's one building I haven't mapped because I thought the red mark meant condemned. It doesn't. It means occupied once, then sealed." Johnny stared. "I leave now. He still has the map in his head. I stay. I can finish what my grandfather started." I swallowed hard enough to hurt. "And I'm done running from my own address." The train hissed impatiently beside us. Johnny looked at the ticket in my hand, then very carefully away, as if granting the choice dignity. "You understand the boss will kill me." "He won't." Johnny gave me a flat look. That confidence is romantic and medically unsound. But he opened the passenger door. On the drive back, I tore the ticket into thin strips and let them gather in my lap like the shed skin of a life I was not going to wear. Every mile north cost something. The safer version of myself. The smaller future. The woman who believed locks existed to keep danger out instead of proving how badly it wanted in. When we reached the villa, Luca was in the lower courtyard speaking to 3 captains and holding himself so still, it took me a second to realize stillness was all he had left that was not fury. He looked at me, at the bag in my hand, at Johnny behind me, at the torn ticket scraps caught in the fold of my coat. No one spoke. I crossed the courtyard under the eyes of armed men and placed the ripped pieces of Ragusa on the stone ledge beside him. "I know what the red mark means," I said, and I came back on purpose. The silence that followed was not kind. It was chosen. The red mark did not mean condemned. It meant woman hidden. My grandfather had used that symbol only on properties with double-keyed exits and no listed owner. Places men paid cash to forget, and women prayed over in whispers. Safe flats. Old ones, some Bellini built, some Bellini fixed, all meant for emergencies that arrived at night. I spread the ledger pages across Luca's office desk, while the villa held its breath outside the door. "The crown mark is Moretti," I said. "The red slash means occupied once, then sealed. Not vacant, cleared, protected." "From who?" Johnny asked from the sofa, clutching a cold pack to his ribs, with the resignation of a saint too handsome for martyrdom. I looked at Luca, because I already knew. "From your family," I said. The office went silent enough for me to hear the clock in the hall. Luca stood by the windows with one hand in his pocket and the other braced against the frame. He had changed shirts after the cannery, but I could still see where the bandage wrapped his side under the dark fabric. He had not asked why I came back. He had not asked why I came back. He had not thanked me. Those absences hurt more than anger might have. "You think Ricardo knows the address," he said. "Yes." Johnny swore softly. "Of course he does, because God hates efficiency." I pointed to a line written in my grandfather's smallest hand. This one. "Via Santalia, top floor, rear stair only. Bellini deadbolt installed after domestic breach. Double lock retrofit. That language is his." My finger trembled over the page. He only wrote like that when a woman was involved. Luca finally turned from the window. Something moved behind his face when he looked at the entry. Not surprise. Recognition dragged up from someplace he did not visit willingly. "I know the building," he said. That chilled me. "Who lived there?" He did not answer immediately. The pause told me enough to hurt. "My mother," he said at last. The room seemed to narrow. I had known he carried some old locked grief. Palermo knew that much in the shapeless public way cities know private tragedies. But not this. Not that my grandfather's careful red mark and Luca's stillness had been touching the same wound all along. "Ricardo handled family security after she died," Gianni said quietly, understanding arriving beside mine. "He had all the old addresses." Luca's jaw shifted once. "He also handled the purge." I looked between them. "Purge of what?" "Women my father kept off the books," Luca said. "Mistresses, witnesses, the mothers of children he didn't want tied to the name. Places like Santalia were supposed to vanish after use." Supposed to. The phrase lodged like glass. "So Ricardo wasn't protecting the network," I said. "He was keeping the map." Luca's gaze met mine. "Yes." And suddenly the shape of the betrayal changed. Not greed. Not ambition by itself. Something uglier. Dressed as duty. A man who loved control enough to call it care. We left within 20 minutes. Luca took me, though Teresa argued in the entrance hall and Johnny made the sign of the cross over his own chest and declared, "If I get killed in a sealed apartment, I'd like it noted I objected on nutritional grounds." Nina kissed his cheek without thinking as she shoved a medical pack into his hand, and the room went silent for one impossible second. Johnny touched the spot like he had been canonized. "I'm never washing again." "You absolutely are," Nina said, pink to the ears. Even Luca's mouth almost moved. Via Santalia was older Palermo. Narrow street, faded saints in tile above doorways, laundry lines like surrender flags between buildings. The flat sat on the top floor behind a warped green door with Bellini brass, I knew on sight. My grandfather's work. The lock had been opened recently. Not forced. Entered. I showed Luca the bright scrape under the lower pin and the whisper of graphite dust at the threshold. He nodded once and positioned himself in front of me before Johnny touched the handle. Inside, the air smelled closed. Old soap. Damp plaster. Dust disturbed that morning. A woman's flat once, maybe many years. The furniture wore sheets. A chipped Madonna stood on the mantel beside a water ring older than I was. In the bedroom, the wardrobe hung open, empty except for one blue scarf, and a cracked compact left in the drawer as if someone thought they might be back in a day. Luca stopped in the doorway. I felt his silence before I looked at him. "This was hers," he said. "Not is. Was." I crossed to the dressing table because my hands needed purpose. Under the mirror, half loose from age, sat a false backing. Bellini style. Grandfather's habit again. Small compartments where women could hide cash, papers, one key, one phone number, one chance. Inside was an envelope addressed in a woman's slanted hand, per Luca. "When you are old enough to know why." My heart jumped. Luca. He took the letter from me, but did not open it. Not yet. Jeannie in the hall said sharply, movement on the rear stair. Then everything broke at once. A shot shattered the mirror. Luca shoved me down behind the bed before the glass finished falling. Men pounded up the stairwell. Johnny fired from the hall, cursing the architecture and his own core strength with equal sincerity. I crawled toward the wardrobe because the rear wall sounded wrong when the bullets struck it hollow, not brick. Another hidden panel. Of course there was another one. My fingers found the seam. Press. Slide. The panel opened onto a crawl space just wide enough for 2 people. Luca! He turned mid-shot. I grabbed his sleeve, dragged, pointed. He understood instantly. Covered the doorway, forced Johnny back toward us between bursts of gunfire. The 3 of us squeezed into the dark just as the bedroom door splintered inward. I pulled the panel shut from inside. In the black, our breathing filled the space. Someone entered the room outside and said, "Calm as church. Luca, you should have left some doors closed." Ricardo. His voice was too near, too gentle. He had brought men to his aunt's grave flat and called it necessity. Luca's hand found mine in the dark only for a second. Almost. Then he let go so carefully it hurt. The crawl space smelled like plaster dust and old cedar. It ran behind the apartment walls in a narrow channel my grandfather must have helped reinforce decades ago. One Bellini trick nested inside another. There was barely room to crouch. Johnny's shoulder pressed into mine on one side. Luca's breath touched the dark on the other. Outside, men moved through the flat. Boots on wood. Drawer slides. A lamp knocked over. Ricardo giving orders in that same measured voice. As if violence arranged politely counted less. "Find the second envelope," he said. "If he's here, he hasn't opened the first." Second envelope. I went cold. My grandfather had not built 1 compartment. He had built 2, and I had only found the first, because the gunshot broke the mirror. Luca leaned close enough for his mouth to brush my ear when he whispered, "Can you move?" "Yes." "Good. This passage drops to the service stair. You go with Johnny." "No." The word left me before thought. His hand closed lightly around the back of my neck. Not hard. Not forcing. Steadying. "Sophia, you're staying." "Yes, so am I." Johnny made a tiny wounded sound. I would love, for once, not to be present for emotionally significant insubordination. A floorboard creaked directly above us. We froze. Then the panel at the far end of the crawl space scraped, not opened fully. Tested, someone new. Johnny mouthed the curse. Ricardo's voice came again, farther now but still terrible. "He'll choose the woman. He always does." That sentence struck harder than the gunfire. It was not triumph in his tone. It was contempt disguised as certainty. He knew Luca's tenderness and believed it made him weak enough to predict. Luca's fingers slipped from my neck. The loss of that touch felt bigger than the space. He leaned in, lips near my temple, and said so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. "That's why he dies." Then he moved. He kicked the lower panel out from our side, creating noise at the far end, and shoved Johnny and me toward the service stair while going the opposite direction, back up toward the bedroom, back toward the men waiting for him. I caught his wrist. Almost. His head turned. Even in the dark, I could feel the force of his attention. "Don't," I whispered. It was not noble. It was worse. Small, frightened, honest. He pressed something into my palm. My apartment key. No, my old apartment key. The one he had kept since the first night. "I'm giving this back," he said, "because now you choose where home is." Then he was gone. Johnny dragged me down the service stair while I shook with the effort not to run after him like an idiot in a tragedy. The stair spat us into a locked laundry room on the 2nd floor. Bellini deadbolts again. Old. Familiar. I opened it with the hairpin Teresa had once pushed into my braid for emergencies and bad men, which apparently in this life had become synonyms. Down on the street, Maria waited with 2 cars and enough armed fury to terrify the saints off nearby walls. "Where is he?" demanded. In the flat. She did not waste a second swearing. Men moved. One team up the main stair, one to the rear alley. Johnny nearly folded against the car and still managed to protest when Nina rushed to him from the second vehicle. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through your shirt. It's decorative." She slapped his shoulder and started bandaging him anyway. I should have stayed in the car. I should have obeyed someone at least once in this story. Instead, I looked up at the third-floor rear window and saw movement. Not Luca, a woman, an older tenant, white hair, floral housecoat, frozen at her door in the wrong place at the wrong time while Ricardo's men flooded the hall. No one else saw her. I ran for the building. Maria hissed my name, but I was already inside, up 2 flights, lungs tearing. I reached the old woman just as a gunman rounded the bend toward the landing. I shoved her into the laundry room and slammed the door, turning the deadbolt by feel. The shot hit wood, not flesh. Thank God for old Bellini brass. I took the widow's wrist and led her down the service stair to Maria's men below. Only then did I let myself shake. The gunfire upstairs ended as abruptly as it began. The silence afterward was worse. Then Luca came down the main stair with blood on his temple, and Ricardo's second envelope in one hand. He saw me alive, saw the old woman clinging to Maria, saw the spent shell by the laundry door, and stopped so suddenly, the men behind him nearly hit his back. For one suspended beat, the whole hall held. Then he crossed to me, wordless, fast, both hands on my face like he needed the shape of it to hold. His forehead touched mine once, hard, desperate enough to bruise. "I told you to go." "I know. You ran back in. There was a woman on the landing." His eyes searched my face as if that answer was both impossible and exactly the one he had expected. Behind him, Maria took the second envelope and swore low. "Ricardo's gone. But this," she looked up. "This is a list of sealed flats. All of them. Women, children, dates. A map of every door he could control, Luca." He should have been angry. She had run back into a building full of gunmen after he gave her a clear exit. Instead, she stood in front of him shaking, soot on her sleeve, another old woman alive because Sofia Bellini could not stop choosing the vulnerable person nearby over herself. It was the same wound opening in him every time. The same impossible answer. He had spent years believing protection meant walls, gates, men with guns. She made it look like a hand on a stranger's wrist and a deadbolt turned in time. Luca closed his eyes once. Only once. When he opened them, something in him had gone colder and more final than revenge. Not because Ricardo had betrayed him. Because Ricardo had turned protection into a prison and called that loyalty. Johnny, pale but conscious, lifted a hand from where Nina was wrapping his side. "For the record," he said weakly, "if we survive this, I want a beach week and unrestricted pasta." No one laughed. Not then. But later I would remember that line and love him for trying. Luca's thumb brushed my cheekbone once before he stepped back. "We finish this tonight," he said, and for the first time I believed one of us might not survive what came next. Ricardo chose the old foundry because men like him confuse abandoned places with control. It sat beyond the freight yards, all rusted gantries and dead furnaces, smelling of iron dust and sea rot. Once it made machine parts for ships. Tonight it held names, addresses, sealed flat ledgers, and the last men Ricardo trusted enough to die slowly. We came in from 2 sides. Maria with the East team, Johnny, against Nina's direct and colorful advice, on calms in the van because apparently near death had done nothing to improve his judgment. Luca with me through the north loading bay, where the side door lock had been replaced in a hurry with a Bellini profile I knew before my fingers touched it. "He used one of ours," I whispered. Luca stood behind me, close enough that the heat of him steadied my hands instead of ruining them. "Can you open it quietly?" "Yes." Of course I could. That was the point of everything, the small practical gift that had gotten me into this story and would get us through its last locked throat. I slid the pick. Felt the old ward. Lifted. Turned. The latch gave with a soft internal click. Luca's signet ring brushed my wrist as he eased past me with his gun drawn. That tiny scrape of metal on skin felt louder than the foundry. Inside, darkness layered itself over old industry, moonlight through broken panes, water dripping somewhere deep, the silence of armed men pretending not to breathe. We moved between hulking presses and conveyor frames until voices carried from the furnace floor below. Ricardo was there. I saw him through the railing, coat immaculate, expression composed, one hand resting on a crate full of file boxes as if this were bookkeeping and not the last rotted chamber of his soul. "These women survived because I kept the map," he was saying to one of his men. "Without order, shelter becomes weakness." I looked at Luca. His face had gone completely unreadable. Mirror, that was what Ricardo had always been, not the wild opposite of Luca. The disciplined version pushed 1 degree farther into cold, protection emptied of mercy until all that remained was possession, with better manners. Maria's voice crackled once in Luca's earpiece. "Positions set." Ricardo heard it too late. What followed was fast and ugly and human. No elegant lines. Crates overturned. Bullets sparked off iron. Men swore and died in work boots. I stayed low behind the rail and passed Luca loaded magazines when he signaled, my fingers steady in the only way they ever were, when there was useful work to do and no time to feel. One of Ricardo's men broke for the furnace office with a torch, the ledgers. I ran before anyone could stop me. The office door had been chained. Bellini chain, new padlock, cheap body. I shot it once with Maria's spare pistol because there wasn't time for dignity. The lock burst. Inside, ledgers and file boxes were stacked beneath a hanging bulb. Beside them sat a woman in her 40s with duct tape at her wrists and terror in her eyes. Witness. Bookkeeper. Whatever Ricardo had not managed to erase yet. "It's okay," I lied, kneeling to cut the tape with the edge of broken lock metal. "Can you walk?" She nodded. We got 2 steps before Ricardo appeared in the doorway. Gun low. Calm eyes, a cup bleeding at his hairline. "You always choose the side room," he said to me, almost conversational. "You and he are alike that way. You think hidden things deserve rescue." My throat closed. He was not there to shoot me first. He was there to hold the next move over Luca like a blade. "Put the files down," he said. I didn't. Footsteps pounded the metal stair outside. Ricardo smiled a little. There. He came. Luca hit the office door frame a breath later, gun up, and stopped when he saw where Ricardo stood close enough to me and the rescued woman that a bad shot would end 3 lives instead of 1. "Move away from her," Luca said. Ricardo tilted his head. "Why? Isn't this what you understand now? A map of women, a ledger of exits, addresses kept from monsters. I did what had to be done after your mother. After every one of them. I kept doors. I kept keys. You kept ownership," Luca said. Ricardo's smile thinned. "Ownership is the only protection that lasts." The words settled over the room like poison because some part of Luca had once been close enough to that idea to understand its language. I saw it, then, the real cost of victory. Not killing Ricardo, admitting how near that logic lived to his own darkest instincts. The rescued woman clutched my sleeve. I could feel her shaking. So I did the only useful thing left. I took my old apartment key from my pocket and threw it hard at the hanging bulb. Glass shattered. Darkness dropped. Ricardo flinched toward the sound. One fraction, one mistake. Luca fired once. When the emergency light kicked in red 3 seconds later, Ricardo was on the floor, and the gun had slid out of his hand into spilled pages. Women's names, children's initials, dates beside addresses that had once been hidden because hidden was the only way to live. Luca stood over him breathing hard, not triumphant. Changed. Older and stripped raw in places no one would ever see but me. Ricardo looked up through blood and said, not bitterly but with terrible sincerity, "You'll understand me when you lose enough." Luca's answer came flat and final. "No, I won't." That was when I knew he had won the right battle. Not because Ricardo died, because Luca refused to become the man he might have become in order to justify it. After the foundry filled with sirens and official voices and men suddenly eager to cooperate now that the ledgers existed in too many hands to bury, the rescued woman gave Maria 3 additional locations and 2 names. Mina bandaged Gianni in the van while he tried, even then, to negotiate for bread. Teresa lit candles in the villa chapel for Renato, for Luca's mother, for every woman whose address had once been held by the wrong man. The sealed flats would be emptied, documented, passed into safer hands. Near dawn, Luca stood beside me on the foundry steps with iron dust on his shoes, and fatigue sunk into the bones of him. "It is over," he said. And because the sky was lightening and he was still standing, I believed him. After war, the villa sounded human again by degrees. Not all at once. Nothing that had held too much fear healed on a clean schedule. But the radios quieted. The gate rotations relaxed. Teresa stopped counting cars under her breath before bed. Mina moved her medical kits back to the clinic. Johnny, miraculously alive and more dramatic for it, limped through recovery like a man personally wronged by mortality. He also got his beach week, not unrestricted pasta. Nina drew a line. I spent my mornings between Bellini Keys and the Moretti office, helping Maria catalog the ledgers from the foundry so the addresses could be transferred safely and never again held in one man's private fist. My shop reopened with new shutters, new locks, and one armed watcher across the street who pretended to buy newspapers for 6 hours at a time. Luca did not ask permission for that. He also did not apologize. There are forms of care that arrive wearing too much steel. I was learning the difference between objecting to them and pretending I did not know what love sometimes looked like in a dangerous language. One afternoon, Teresa asked me to fix a cracked porcelain saint from the upstairs corridor. I set up at the kitchen table with adhesive, cotton gloves, and a magnifier while lemon peels dried near the window and sea light turned the marble pale gold. Johnny wandered in counting almonds. Nina says 8 is a serving. She says that because after 8 you call it a personality trait. I told him. He clutched the almond jar to his chest. You wound me, Sophia. Nina came in behind him, took the jar and kissed his cheek so absent-mindedly I knew it had finally become habit. Johnny froze. Teresa looked heavenward. Madonna, at last. He touched his cheek with reverence. I'm framing this face. I laughed over the broken saint. It had fractured across the chest years ago and been repaired badly. Yellow glue thick in the seam. I softened the old adhesive, cleaned it away, and reset the pieces with a cleaner line. Luca entered midway through this and stopped in the doorway. The kitchen altered, but not the way it had the first week. Less fear now. More accommodation. Everyone else had learned his shapes as well as I had. He stood with one hand in his pocket, jacket over his arm, watching me fit broken porcelain back together with absurd concentration. What? I asked. You're frowning at a saint. It's uneven. So fix it. I am. A pause. I wasn't talking to the porcelain. The room went quiet enough for Johnny to decide survival required motion. He grabbed Nina's hand, announced he needed air for medical reasons, and limped out with scandalized speed, while Teresa muttered blessings that sounded suspiciously like gossip. That left Luca and me in the kitchen light. I set the saint down carefully because my fingers had started to shake. He came to the table and stopped across from me. Not too close. Never presumptuous. Not anymore. You should know, he said. The women from Santalia and the other flats have all been moved. New keys. New papers where needed. Bellini locks on the doors. Something in my chest ached softly. Good. The charity board for the municipal shelters asked where the funding came from. And? I told them an angry locksmith. A smile threatened before I could stop it. Very dignified. I'm rarely accused of that by you. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable. Worse. Tender. His hand moved to the table. Open palm upward. An offer, not a demand. I looked at it, then placed my fingers in his. The first time he took my hand, there had been blood and panic and a shop full of fear. This time there was only the kitchen, the smell of lemons, and the dangerous steadiness of a man giving me room to refuse. I didn't. He turned my hand slowly and set something in my palm, my old apartment key. Not as a command, not as evidence. Polished now. Clean. I had the shop title transferred fully into your name with no outstanding claims, he said. The upstairs apartment is secure if you ever want it. The villa is secure if you don't. Bellini Keys stays yours either way. I looked up too fast. Why are you giving me options like this? Sounds casual. His gaze held mine. Because it isn't casual. The air changed. He drew a breath like a man about to step in front of something live. I know what marriage costs when it isn't chosen, he said. I know what a locked door can become in the wrong hands. I won't make a home with you out of debt, gratitude, or fear. His thumb brushed once over my knuckles. But if you stay as mine in the only way that matters, I would like the right to ask properly. Tears burned so fast it embarrassed me. I laughed once instead because otherwise I might have broken open in the middle of Teresa's kitchen. That was almost romantic. It's the best you're getting in front of the saints. I cried then anyway, quiet and angry at myself for it. He moved around the table at once, not fast enough to startle, only enough to be there when I tipped toward him. Almost. He stopped with one hand at my waist, waiting. I stepped the last inch myself, my face pressed into his shirt. His chin touched my hair. The kitchen held. When he spoke against my temple, the nickname sounded nothing like it had the first night in the shop. Little stray, he said softly. Will you marry me when there are no guns in the room? I nodded before I trusted my voice. Then I made myself say it because some things deserved words. Yes. He kissed my forehead, not my mouth. Somehow that felt bigger. That night, the villa settled around us with unusual quiet. I went to sleep in my guest room with my old key under the pillow and the understanding that I would never again mistake having somewhere to go for belonging. On the terrace below, I could hear men changing guard in the dark. One of them coughed. Another murmured in Sicilian. Life went on. Dangerous, ordinary, unhealed. But when I looked out through the curtains, Luca was in the courtyard speaking to Maria under the lamps. One hand in his pocket, the other resting briefly over the place where the bullet had grazed him. Then he looked up, not because he could see me, because he knew where I would be. And that small, impossible thing felt more intimate than any vow. I slept with the window cracked open to the sea. 10 months later, the sound that started everything returned. Metal on metal. Not wrong this time. Familiar. I was kneeling on the floor of the back room at Bellini Keys with a box of replacement cylinders beside me and a baby monitor tucked in the crook of one elbow, because apparently, this was my life. Now wife to a Moretti, owner of a locksmith shop with municipal shelter contracts, and temporary emergency keeper of Johnny and Nina's 6-week-old daughter while both of them argued upstairs with a delivery man about organic formula that cost more than perfume. I'm telling you, Johnny yelled from the landing, if this child develops refined taste before teeth, society collapses. Nina's voice followed, dry as ever. The child is fine. You are having a personality event. I smiled to myself and fitted the spring into place. The front bell chimed. Afternoon light cut across the counter. Outside, Via Calderai hummed with scooters and market voices and laundry flapping between balconies. The shutters were open. The shop smelled like brass dust, paper, and the lemon-polished Teresa insisted on sending over every Sunday as if cleanliness were a sacrament. Then came the sound again, a key turning in the upstairs apartment door. Smooth. Sure. Known. My body still reacted first. A small tightening under the ribs. Memory was rude like that. I set the cylinder down, wiped my hands on my apron, and started for the stairs. Halfway up, I heard Johnny in the hall murmuring to the baby like a man negotiating with an angry bishop. Nina laughed once. The sound made the whole building feel rooted in the world instead of hanging above it. I opened the door to my old apartment and found Luca standing inside with 2 garment bags over one arm and our son on his hip. He was 8 months old, solemn-eyed, dark-haired, and completely unimpressed by the logistics of his own existence. One tiny fist was wrapped in the knot of Luca's tie, which explained the state of it. Luca looked up. Black suit, open collar, neck tattoos visible above the crisp line of white, light beard, darker than it used to be in winter. Older by 10 months in the good ways and some of the bad ones too. He held up the apartment key. I used the original. As opposed to what? I asked, breaking in. His mouth almost moved. I like when your blood pressure stays reasonable. I crossed the room slowly because our son was reaching for me and because there were still moments, even now, when the sight of Luca in this apartment hit some buried fault line in me. Same man. Same rooms. Nothing the same. The first night, he had come through my shutter smelling of dark air and control and told me I would not sleep there again. Now he stood in my kitchen with diaper powder on one cuff. I took the baby. Luca's hand stayed at the small of my back 1 second after the transfer, warm and unhurried. Almost. Still almost. Sometimes. That was the thing no one told you. Love did not end the ache of waiting. It taught you how to live inside it without fear. Our son patted my cheek with damp authority. I kissed his forehead and looked past Luca to the open garment bags on the table. Tell me those aren't what I think they are. They're what Teresa thinks they are, he said. Ah, so gowns, prayers, possibly lace weaponry. The foundation dinner starts in 90 minutes. I closed my eyes. I remember being told about it. I apparently forgot the part where I had to attend. You're opening a shelter wing in your grandfather's name, Sophia. Yes. Which means I should be allowed to wear overalls and emotional exhaustion. Luca stepped closer, gaze dropping to the baby monitor clipped to my apron, then to the smear of graphite on my wrist. You've had a day. I've had Gianni in the building. Fair. From the hall, as if summoned, Gianni shouted, I reject the slander in this household. Nina shouted back, then stop narrating your own protein intake. My son startled, then giggled. Luca's face changed. No, not changed. Opened. He looked at the baby in my arms the way he had once looked at me, across a locksmith counter, with disbelief edged in something like reverence and a fear, so deep it made him gentler, not harder. He reached out, rubbed one finger over the tiny heel peeking from the child's sock, and then stilled. There it was, the same wound, the same man, the same impossible effort not to let love become a cage. Mrs. D'Amico called, I said quietly. His eyes came back to mine. She says the widow in 3B is pretending not to need the stair rail fixed. I told Marco to go tomorrow. Luca was very still. And chapter 1, though I did not know it was a chapter then. I had stood shaking in a key shop and asked about another woman's broken chain before I asked for myself. Now 10 months married, with his child on my hip and his ring on my hand, I was still cataloging the nearest vulnerable person before my own inconvenience. Something in his face gave way so slightly another woman would have missed it. I didn't. You're doing the look, I said. What look? The one where you think I won't notice you having an internal crisis. His hand rose to the back of my neck, some resting under my ear. Familiar, devastating. I noticed it again. The rail, you. I stopped breathing for one beat. Luca glanced at our son, then back at me. You still do it. Every time. You walk into a room and find the person least protected in it before you think of yourself. His thumb moved once. I've built a life around that now. I wanted to answer lightly. I wanted to say something clever, something that did not reveal the softest parts of me so easily. Instead, because motherhood had ruined some of my defenses and marriage the rest, my eyes filled. That isn't a burden, he said at once. I know. I shifted the baby higher against my shoulder. That's the problem. He exhaled like a man hit somewhere private. Then, with our son watching solemnly between us, Luca reached into his pocket and brought out my brass apartment key. The same one. The one from the first night. The one he had taken when my world broke open. The one he had returned in pieces of truth until it belonged to both of us differently. He hooked it gently on the ring beside our house key, the new house. The one on the hill that still had sea wind in the windows and a deadbolt I had personally chosen because paranoia and marriage were apparently compatible. As the brass touched, his signet ring scraped softly against it. Metal on metal. The same sound, completely different meaning. Home. "Come back downstairs with me," he said. "I'm holding your son. He's mine too." I lifted my eyebrows. Luca corrected himself without shame. Ours. Better. From the landing, Johnny appeared with the baby's blanket draped over one shoulder like an exhausted duchess. "I would like it recorded that my daughter is asleep. I haven't eaten since 11, and if this gala serves dry chicken, I'm resigning." Nina appeared behind him, took the blanket off his shoulder, and said to me, "He's lying. He had almonds in the car." "Those were medicinal," Johnny said. I laughed so hard I had to hand the baby back to Luca before I dropped him. Johnny looked smug, Nina looked in love against her will, and Luca, with our son in his arms and my old key on our shared ring, looked like the most dangerous man in Palermo had somehow built an ordinary life anyway and still did not trust himself not to lose it. That was the unresolved part maybe, not whether he loved me. I knew that, not whether I had chosen him. I had, but whether love can ever stop feeling like a risk when both people remember exactly what it costs to get there. Luca leaned in and touched his forehead briefly to mine, our son making a small offended noise between us. "Little stray," he murmured, smiling now in a way only I ever saw. "We're late." And because the shop bell rang below, because Johnny was complaining, because Nina was rolling her eyes, because somewhere Mrs. D'Amico still needed a rail fixed, and the city still turned on keys and promises, and the particular mercy of doors that opened when they should, I went with him.